Well, as Josh mentioned, we're starting this new series leading up to Easter that we've titled Via Dolorosa, Life-Changing Experiences on Jesus' Road to the Cross. And through the series, we'll be talking about this question, who is Jesus? Via Dolorosa, by the way, in Latin, most literally, it means the way of sorrow, the road of sorrow. But Christians for centuries have talked about Via Dolorosa as the road to the cross. And so we want to look at this path that Jesus took, starting early in his ministry, and then unwrap the encounters that he has with people and how we see him reveal himself through these encounters. If I were to ask you the simple question, who is Jesus? How would you answer that question? And I ask that question because of all the questions you are ever asked in life, maybe this is the most important question, who is Jesus? If you've been in church for any length of time, then you probably have heard about Jesus a lot. Like most of us here, some of you here with me grew up going to Sunday school. In Sunday school, we sang songs about Jesus, like Jesus Loves Me. We memorized verses about Jesus, and we got gold stars next to our name. We even had this advanced technology for the day called flannel graph. Can I see the hands of any of you who remember flannel graph? And flannel graph Jesus was usually holding a child. You know, he liked kids. Or he was holding a sheep. He really seemed to like sheep as well. So it was a sheep or a kid. If he wasn't holding a sheep or a kid, then he was standing there with his hand up. He'd have a white robe and a sash, and he looked like he's ready to give a high five. Just anybody a high five. And in flannel graph, Jesus had this long wavy hair and a beard, kind of looked like he should be singing for the band ABBA, if you remember them. And that was what Jesus looked like. And he seemed really nice in Sunday school. And he did seem like a radical or the revolutionary that he turns out to be. So maybe we know a little bit about Jesus, but do you really know what Jesus is all about? And what does Jesus Christ mean to you? When we look at Scripture, when we look at the life of Jesus, when we talk about who he is, I want to build on what Josh said. Josh said that maybe more than any other person in the history of the world, Jesus has influenced our history and our culture and our society more than anyone else. For example, you can't look at a calendar without being reminded that our calendar starts on the day that Jesus was born, 2018 years ago. Every date, every appointment you make is based on the life of Jesus. You can't look at Google Maps, for example, without being reminded of Jesus, because it seems like all over the world there are places with names that talk about Jesus. For example, the capital of California is Sacramento, which is named after a dinner that Jesus had with his friends, and it was called a sacrament, so we have Sacramento. Or you have cities. Every state, every country, it seems like, has cities named after his followers. Like in California, again, you have Santa Maria, named after his follower Mary. Or you have in the Virgin Islands, San Thomas, named after the disciple Thomas. Or in Russia, you have St. Petersburg, after Peter. Or in Puerto Rico, you have San Juan, named after his follower John. Or another example would be Tucson. Let's just move on. There's nothing to the name, I guess. Except the Midwesterners call it Tucson, so that's gotta be worth something. But if I were to ask you, who is Jesus? How would you answer that question? And what does Jesus mean to you? Some people, I hear, say they don't believe in Jesus. Some are skeptics and doubters. The thing is, at least in our society, in our culture, the same people who say they don't believe in Jesus probably believe or at least like his values and his ideas. What do I mean by that? There are a number of things that we value as a people in our society that are all rooted in Jesus and his teachings. For example, the idea of human dignity is rooted in Jesus. Before Jesus, women and children and foreigners had no more status than a dog did. Then Jesus comes along and he lifts up women and he says, take care of children, and he embraces and welcomes in the foreigner. And he says, at my table, everyone has a seat. So the idea of human dignity, it all started with Jesus. The idea of caring for the sick and the disabled, everyone in our culture values that. Most people don't know, or many don't know, it starts with Jesus. Before Jesus, the lame, if you were crippled, if you had a disability or you were sick, you would often be sent to live outside the town or the city. You were seen as cursed by God or some God with a small g. And so people wanted nothing to do with the disabled or the sick, but then Jesus comes along and he says, bring them to me. And he puts his hands on them and he not only accepts them, but he heals them. The idea of caring for the sick or the disabled, it starts with Jesus. Or how about the idea of a peaceful society? And in our culture, we all value a peaceful society, don't we? But most people don't know that it starts with Jesus. Before Jesus, if you had an enemy, there was one rule of thumb, and it was pretty simple. Kill your enemy, all right? Just kill your enemy. Yeah, if your next door neighbor is your enemy, well, then kill them. If another tribe was your enemy, then kill them. Then Jesus comes along, and what does he say? He says, love your enemy. No one had ever heard of this idea. No one had ever thought about loving their enemy. And so the idea of a peaceful society, living in peace with our neighbors, that all starts with Jesus. So someone may come along and say, well, yeah, I value human dignity. I value caring for the disabled and the sick, and I want to live in a peaceful society, but I don't believe in Jesus. Well, you can say that, but it's rather glib, isn't it? Because all of those things find their root in Jesus Christ. So in this series, Via Dolorosa, Life-Changing Encounters with Jesus, we want to pause on his road, starting in his early ministry, and stop to look at the encounters he has with different people. Because in each encounter, we see a little bit of his character revealed. He shows us who he is. We learn about what God wants him to do, what his purpose is. And then here's the best part. Here's the kicker, is that every person who encounters Jesus on the road to the cross, they're changed forever. Their lives are dramatically changed. And here's the best part for you and me, is those things that happened 2,000 years ago in the followers of Jesus who encountered him, it can still happen in our lives today. So I have this key idea on the screen, and it's this, that Jesus changed the life of every person he encountered on the road to the cross. And he can change your life too. And as we look at these encounters, I want to point out to you that we will see the Christology of Christ taught to us. Christology is the branch of theology that deals with the idea that Jesus was fully God and Jesus is fully human, and how do those two things come together? And then Christology also teaches us what his work on the cross does for us. So that's what we'll be doing through this series. So if you have your Bibles, open up to Mark. Our series is going to be in John, but I want to start in Mark. But I say all of that as we start out this morning to say that this question, who do you say that Jesus is? Who do you say that Jesus is? It will be the most important question that you ever face, that any person ever faces. So our series is in John, but our first encounter that is in John 1, really for more full context, it's in Matthew and Mark. So I want to start reading in Mark. And in Mark we read this. I'll start at verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake because they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said. By the way, if you have a pen, underline these words in your Bible. Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. That's his invitation. Now turn about 10, 15 pages in your Bible to John 1, and we pick up the next day, verse 43. Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. So to each of these young men he finds fishing, he says the same thing. He says, follow me. And we read in Mark that immediately they drop their nets and they follow him. Why is this? Because isn't it true that there are some things in life worth following more than others. There are some things that are more worth following and giving our life to than others. And it's certainly the case with what Jesus offers. When he says, follow me, it's worth giving up everything else for in order to follow him. Some things have that kind of value, and that's what it's like with following Jesus. And if I were to ask you this morning, what are you following? How would you answer that question? Because when Jesus says, follow me, these first followers, they have to leave something. We've all been following something else. Now, maybe you're here this morning, you go, no, you don't understand, Palmer. I've been a follower of Jesus since I was 6 years old, and I'm still following him. But let me ask you this. Are you following Jesus more than anything else? Because sometimes we follow the wrong things, or sometimes we follow just Jesus with just part of who we are. Or sometimes we aren't following anything much at all. The question today is, will you follow Jesus Christ? So I love this next line. When he finds them, this is in verse 8. So go back to Mark chapter 1. We read, and I'll start in verse 47. Not 47, verse 17. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. Verse 18. Immediately they dropped their nets and followed him. So I have a net here this morning, and this is actually a true Mediterranean net you would find where these fishermen were. I'm just making this up. This is from Amazon, and I don't know what you could catch for this. A bass, a really big bass. But, the idea is you throw it, you cast it, and then this one you come back with just shells. They're decorative shells, but let's say it's been on the bottom of the Mediterranean and caught some shells. Anyway, so they have their nets in their hands, and we read that immediately. This is their career. This is how they're going to feed their families. This is what they do for a living. We read immediately with these nets, and they drop them, and they just forget about that, and they leave. But the truth is, most of us are not so willing and so quick to drop our nets. I think all of us as human beings, we hold on to a net, some kind of net. And I would ask you today, what net is in your hands? If you are honest about it, what is it that you are clenching in your fist and holding on to more tightly than Jesus Christ? I think we all do. And maybe you know what it is. No one else maybe knows, but maybe your net is a vice, something that you have no business doing. Maybe your net is a person, and the person that you have no business spending time with. What is your net? Or maybe it's a person that's holding you back from Jesus Christ. It might be a good person, but they're holding you back from him. Maybe your net is a career or a job, and that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, but you're holding on more tightly to that than even to Jesus Christ. Or maybe your net is your plans. You have these big plans. They're really good plans. They're great plans. But have you ever stopped to think that God might have better plans for your life? But you can't have those plans until you drop your net. And so we read that these followers, they drop their net and they follow him. And I think that question is there for all of us. Are you willing to drop the nets that are in your hands in order to follow Jesus Christ? Your net, like I said, it may be a good thing, like theirs was fishing. It's not a bad thing. But then Jesus says, take your fishing life, your skill and your ability, and now go fishing for people. I love the way he does that. Maybe you're very good at something else. Maybe you're not good at fishing. Maybe you are a teacher. Then take your teaching life and teach for Jesus. And maybe you're in sales, and sales is a good thing. Then maybe start to pitch Jesus. Or maybe you're in the medical field and start to heal people's souls. Maybe you're a mechanic. Then the call is to start fixing people's lives. Well, not everyone, maybe like a lot of us, is ready to drop their net. And so we read about Nathanael. And so let's go back to John chapter 1. And Philip, who's already following Jesus, he finds Nathanael. I want to start reading in verse 45. So the text continues. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one who Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets wrote. So he's saying, we found the Messiah. We found the Christ. This is a big deal. And then he says, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth, can anything good come out of there? Nathanael asked. Come and see, Philip says. So do you hear that? So Philip is trying to convince his friend that they found the Messiah. But he says he's a skeptic and he's a doubter, and he mocks that Jesus is from Nazareth. So here's the thing. He thinks, and some believe that Nathanael is a student of the Talmud and that he's a rabbinical student, and he's saying, oh, only uneducated people are from Nazareth. Here's the thing, and he's looking down from anyone from Nazareth. He himself, we know, is not from the city Jerusalem. He's like from Eloy, but he's making fun of people from Ajo. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And he's from the same region, just a different town. And he doesn't want to believe. He doesn't believe at all that the Messiah is here. And Philip's trying to say, no, the Messiah is here. Believe me, come and see. And he won't. You ever had a moment like that? A friend try to tell you, no, I'm going to introduce you to somebody, and you go, no, that will never happen. I had a moment like that. I'm sure I've had several, but it's way back when I was in junior high school, and it was with a friend who actually was in town this last week. He's a missionary in Mexico, and he was visiting this last week. His name is Joel, and we both grew up in Liberia, Africa together. And when we were in junior high school, Jimmy Carter was coming to Liberia. Okay, who knows Jimmy Carter? Can I see the hands? All right, he was a president of our country, so I hope you know. So we heard Jimmy Carter's coming. And so Joel said to me, he said, hey, come to my house. And he said, we're going to stand on the road, and we think Jimmy Carter's going to stop, and we'll get to meet him. And I was like, you're out of your mind. I said, why do you think he's going to stop? He said, well, we're making a sign that says the Baptist youth welcome Jimmy Carter. And he said, we're going to get a bunch of Baptist youth in front of my house, and we think Jimmy Carter will stop. And I was like, no, he's not going to stop. Plus, we were Presbyterians, not Baptists. And so I didn't believe him for a minute. And so I went to the airport. My family went to the airport to try to see Jimmy Carter. And sure enough, when their plane landed, it seemed like a great decision, because when the plane landed, Rosalind Carter saw that I was wearing a Jimmy Carter t-shirt. His face was this big. We bought it in Plains, Georgia, his hometown. And I'm wearing this. And Rosalind Carter comes over and she says, oh, and we got our picture with her. I'm so excited we met Rosalind Carter. Well, the next day I see my buddy Joel, and I said, man, I'm glad I didn't come with you because we met Rosalind Carter. And he says, that's not a big deal, Palmer. We met Jimmy Carter. I said, what? I said, how? He says, well, his motorcade was flying by, doing 80 miles an hour with the tinted windows. And he said he saw the sign that we're holding that said the Baptist youth welcome Jimmy Carter. So he stopped the motorcade, and they turned it around, and they pulled into our driveway. And then he got out of the limousine. And then, Palmer, the president of Liberia, President Talbert, is also a Baptist preacher, so he got out too. So the president of America and the president of Liberia, they came in our yard, and we had cookies and lemonade waiting for them. And we had cookies and lemonade. I'm not making this up. And we had our picture, and he's showing me their picture, and he says, don't you wish you were here, Palmer? And I was like, yeah, for one day I was wishing I was a Baptist. One day. But I hadn't believed him, just like Nathanael. And so Philip's saying this, believe me, the Messiah is here. And he's dragging his feet because of his arrogance and his pride. He doesn't think it can be true, but for some reason he follows. And so here's what happens next. Let's look back in John chapter 1, pick up in verse 45. Or 47, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. And Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus says a couple of extremely interesting things here. First, Nathanael can't believe that Jesus knows him. He says, how do you know me? Well, Jesus says, I know you. I saw you. And so I have this thought on the screen. Jesus sees you. Jesus doesn't just see Nathanael. He sees you. And in spite of Nathanael's resistance, in spite of Nathanael's doubt and skepticism, Jesus says, come and follow me. Jesus makes this interesting statement. He says, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree. Why would that matter? All of a sudden, that statement makes Nathanael believe that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, to give us some context, some scholars believe that, first of all, it's a known thing that when a Jewish person says under the fig tree, it means they are praying, okay? Because they would often go under a tree for shade, so under the fig tree means he was praying. And then also in first century Israel, scholars say that the rabbis would tell everyone, when you pray, if you don't pray for the coming Messiah, then you haven't prayed at all. So everyone was told, you have to pray for the Messiah, especially when Jesus came. When Jesus came, the boot of Rome was on the neck of every Jewish person, so they're all pleading with God every day, please send the Messiah. So some say it's very likely that when Philip came and tapped Nathanael on the shoulder under the fig tree, he interrupted him praying for the Messiah. And he says, come and meet the Messiah. And then he comes, and Jesus says, I am the one who you've been waiting for. I am the one who you've been praying for. I have here that Jesus sees, and he sees Nathanael, but he doesn't just see Nathanael. He sees you and me in the same way. Nathanael says, how do you know me? He knows you and me in the very same way. I think Jesus sees like no one else on planet Earth has ever seen. Jesus noticed everyone and everything. He would notice a woman who was alone, or he would notice a child who was sick, or he would notice a man who was lame, and he did something about it. Jesus was very good at seeing. I think all of us have this longing in our heart that somebody sees us, doesn't it? Because when we read that Jesus sees, it also means that he cares and he loves and he has empathy for us. For the Hebrew people, this was new theology because their God, the God that they knew, was just a God that they feared. They knew their God for his anger and his wrath and his vengeance and his judgment. They spent most of their days just trying to avoid punishment. Their thinking was, if I can get through today without God getting mad at me and destroying my crops or giving me leprosy, it's been a good day. That's how they went through life. But now Jesus comes along, and when he says, I see you, he sees you with compassion and love and empathy. We all want that. In our hearts, we all want somebody to see us and care about us. Adults won't verbalize it. We're not that vulnerable, but kids will. Kids say this. Let me ask, can I see the hands of everyone who's raised a kid, has a kid, or knows a kid? Anyone that has a neighbor kid? All right. So when kids are growing up, they all say the same thing, don't they? They all say, watch me. They say, watch me, don't they? Maybe it might be on a diving board. They're about to try their first, hey, watch me, Dad, or watch me, Mom. It might be on the couch. They're going to try, hey, watch me. They might just be doing a Lego castle, and they'll say, watch me. Or they might be painting a picture, but they always say, watch me. Adults, we have this in our hearts, too. I have a good friend. His name is John Lott. He's a football coach, and he's from Texas. And whenever we go out to dinner with our wives, or if we're going to lunch, and when we walk by kids, like someone holding their kid's hand, he'll always say to the kid, I see you. And he's got this deep, raspy, husky voice, and he says, I see you, with his Texas drawl. And the kids light up. Some of them do cartwheels and things like that, because we all want some. I've tried saying, I see you to a kid, and then they kind of run, and it seems creepy. So I've stopped doing that. But when he does it with his football coach, raspy voice, it means something. But I think we all long for that, don't we? We want to know that somebody sees us and somebody cares. And that in spite of all our flaws, in spite of, like Nathanael, with all his shortcomings and his bad attitude and his over-opinionatedness, Jesus still wants him. He sees, he says, I saw you. Now come and follow me. And here's the thing. And if you're writing anything down this morning, write this down. Not only does Jesus see you, I'm convinced he sees something in you. He believes that you have what it takes to be a follower. These young men that he invites to follow him, he sees something in them that no one else has ever seen. The reason they're fishing, the reason all of these guys who he invited from Bethsaida. Bethsaida means house of fishing. So they're from a fishing village. But all of them, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, they had all obviously, clearly already flunked out of Bet Talmud or rabbinical school. Because if they were the best of the best, if they were the brightest of the brightest, then their local rabbi would have already come to these young men and said, follow me. The rabbi would have already said that. But instead, the rabbi came and tapped them on the shoulder one day during class and said, hey, your SAT scores haven't been looking so good. So why don't you go learn the family trade like fishing? And so they leave. And so we shouldn't be so surprised that when Jesus says, come follow me, it seems astonishing they would leave the family trade, but he has something much better. So they drop their nets. And so my point is that Jesus sees something in them that no one else has ever seen. Jesus believes they have what it takes. I think one of the best feelings in life, isn't it, is when someone sees potential in you. So they see something that no one else has ever seen. When I say that, I think about the Combine. The NFL Combine was just happening this last week in Indianapolis. And the NFL Combine is when the top college players from around the country come together, and you have NFL scouts, you have general managers and coaches all come for a week to watch these guys work out and throw the football and catch a football, and then they try to choose their draft picks. So I was watching it this week, and it made me think about the 2000 draft. In the 2000 draft, a young, skinny, self-proclaimed skinny quarterback from Michigan showed up for the Combine. His name, maybe you've heard of his name. His name is Tom Brady. A few of you might have. And so Tom Brady shows up for the draft, and nobody was that interested in Tom Brady at the time. He had played at Michigan and finally started his senior year, but most people knew Tom Brady as being Jay Feely's holder, holding for the extra points and the field goals. That's all they knew him for. And so now he's at the Combine, and they run the 40, and they time him, and his time is a 5.2. Well, 5.2 is a really good time if you're a 350-pound offensive lineman. It's not so good if you're a quarterback. And so at the end of the Combine, his scouting report is miserable. In fact, Brady recently posted it on his Instagram account. I'm going to read you what he put. He says, this is my scouting report, verbatim. It says, Tom Brady, poor build, skinny, lacks strength, lacks mobility, can't avoid the rush, lacks a really strong arm, can't drive the ball downfield, doesn't throw a tight spiral, gets knocked down easily. That's not one positive thing in the scouting report. And so you look at it and you think he doesn't have a chance. But one coach, one person sees some potential. They see something in him. He sees something in him that nobody else sees. And this coach knows a little bit about football here. His name is Belichick, and Bill Belichick. And so maybe he sees, but he sees, maybe it was the way he threw the ball. Maybe it's just one pass that he threw. Maybe he saw his eyes. And so he picks him. He doesn't pick him, though. He doesn't take a big risk. In the 6th round, and he's drafted 199th overall, Tom Brady's pick. He shows up in Boston, and the owner of the Patriots, Bob Kraft, is walking through the locker room. And so Tom Brady goes up, and he introduces himself, and he says, my name is Tom Brady. And Kraft says, I know who you are. You're our 6th round quarterback pick. And then Tom Brady says this, and yes, Mr. Kraft, I'm the best decision this organization has ever made. And he was right. But all because one coach sees that this one young player has potential. He sees something in him that nobody else sees. He believes he has what it takes. And I say that all that today to say that as Jesus picked these first followers and he said, follow me, he saw something in them that nobody else saw. He believed they had what it takes. And it's the same for you. Maybe you don't think you have what it takes to be a follower of Jesus Christ that makes an incredible difference in this community and in this world, but you have what it takes. Jesus sees you, and he believes you have what it takes. All right, one last thought that I want to share from this passage, and it's this, that you will see something incredible. So let's go back to verse 49, and Jesus says, you haven't seen anything yet. So in verse 49, we read, then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. So Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? And then this is how this next line reads in the Message Bible. You haven't seen anything yet. Let's pick up verse 51. I love that. You haven't seen anything yet. You just seen a bit. Verse 51, Jesus says, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Now, this is a really important thing that Jesus says because he's showing us who he is as God. You didn't catch that maybe the first time through, but in verse 51, he says, you will see angels, you'll see heaven open up and angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man, on me. Now, this angels ascending and descending, it comes from Genesis chapter 28. Because in Genesis chapter 28, Abraham's grandson Jacob, he's alone in the desert. He falls asleep with his head on a rock. Remember this, and he has a dream. And in the dream, he sees heaven opened up, and he sees a ladder coming down. This ladder is connecting heaven and earth. And then he sees angels ascending and descending on it, and then God speaks. So Jesus now says, he says, you'll see, that's me. The ladder connecting heaven to earth, it's me. And I am God in the flesh. This thing that Jacob saw years ago, now it's actually happening. This idea that God is among us. And by the way, when Jacob wakes up and he has had this dream, he says this, he names the place Bethel, which means house of God. He says, God was in this place and I was not aware of it. And Jesus is saying now, years later, God is in this place and it's me and you better be aware of it. But Jesus is trying to make clear to Nathanael and to all of us that he has crashed through the concrete slab that separates heaven from earth and God is now among us. And then he uses this language. His last words are ascending and descending on the Son of Man. He's talking about himself. Now, in the Gospels, you'll hear Jesus talk about himself as the Christ, but 82 times he refers to himself as the Son of Man. And maybe you've never wondered, why does he call himself the Son of Man? He's using Daniel language. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel says, the Son of Man will come from heaven to rule all of earth. So he's saying, I'm the one who Daniel talked about. I am God in the flesh. I am God among you. And the point in all that is that Jesus is trying to tell Nathanael, I am worth following. God is among you. And I would say to you today that Jesus Christ is worth following. Jesus Christ is worth dropping your net for. And Nathanael's net had been his pride and his arrogance and his education. And now Jesus says, drop your net. And he's saying, I am worth it because God is here among you. Maybe you're not aware of it, but God is here and I'm here. And so today, I would ask you, what, as I did at the beginning, what net are you holding on to, clinging to more tightly than Jesus Christ? What net is keeping you from following him with your whole entire life?